All right. I want to get through this in like the next 7 minutes, just so that you have a framework. We won't get through the whole thing, but that way you know operationally how to get them off the ground. Okay. So I want to take note here. There are different ways that you can get students to come to these discussions prepared, which is the standard. Comes to discussions prepared. You can do what I just had you do and have them partner up with someone and have that partner select the question. Or what I do in my class is have them, this is what I typically lean into, I have them read the questions to the group, and then have the group flash 1, 2, or 3. And the majority rules. So if there's enough 3s, that's the question that they're going to bring. And there's no discussion allowed at that point. It's just 1, 2, 3. Which question? Then they organize them in that order so that all those other questions can be tapped into if there's enough time. Did that make sense? So I just had you share for the purpose of time, but in my classes now that they're up and running, I have them read all 3 questions. Everyone in that group will flash a finger, 1, 2, or 3, letting that person know which question they'd like for them to raise first.
How big are the groups?
Now we're keeping them 8 to 10. 8 to 10 individuals, and no more than 12 is the rule.
12 seems big.
It is big. So you really want to, if you can, the 8.
You wouldn't do groups of 4?
I have tried groups of 4. Sometimes it's hard to keep the conversations moving. Okay. All right. So today I'm gonna actually ask Josh to start share your question first. Josh, you're gonna share your question. Our goal today is to respond to Josh's question and everyone else's questions with text evidence. If someone shares something and you want to extend on their idea, you may do so. If you have a connection, you maybe you have something that you're connecting with on a personal level, or you have read about something else, or you want to connect to the world, you can also do that. You can bring in outside information that you know. Just be sure you provide us with some context. If you need clarification, the question is confusing, you may ask your partners to do so. The best, the people that are going to earn the highest scores are people that have arrows coming to their names with all 5 of these colors. Because you are showcasing all of the abilities in standard X. Quick check for understanding. If I want to get a 4 out of 4 today, how many different colors do I want coming out of my name?
4. 5.
The 5. I want to ask a question. I want to ask a question as well. Okay, Josh, do you mind reading your question for us?
Yeah, my question is more philosophical, so it'll be more difficult to find textual evidence, but
Okay.
Is it okay for our nation or for our country to openly admit that we value defense more than we value education based on our budgets? No politician would ever say that, but is it okay? Can we just all admit that?
Any thoughts?
Well, I'm in agreement where you spend your money is where your heart is what I've always believed. So if I look at the government checkbook, there's a lot, yeah. So I'm in agreement. I'm in agreement with Josh.
Are there any other opinions? Thank you for sharing, Chris.
I think if you look at the federal budget, the biggest chunk besides the national debt is the military spending. Education is way at the bottom. Usually a fraction of the defense budget. I think that the evidence supports that.
But I think going to the question, I don't think it'll ever be okay to admit that.
Yeah, not politically correct.
By admitting it, you're supposedly selling out the future, even though how we spend our money, we're selling out the future.
I don't really think it's politically correct. I think it's politically feasible. It's not politically feasible to say it. And that's kind of my question. It would be nice if someone would admit, well, it's not a priority.
Well, some may argue that the first priorities of the federal government is public safety and the safety of the nation, the defense of the nation. So that's why almost 60-some% of dollars go for defense spending first. They can say if you don't secure the homeland, if the nation isn't safe, it really doesn't matter what the education system is if you got bombs being dropped on you.
But
which is totally valid. It's just nobody will say that.
Right.
But also isn't the prosperity
Great
of
way
the
to do it.
civilians a part of the, federal job description?
I'm so sorry.
Ensuring the prosperity of the civilians, you know?
Which provides the
Oh,
money.
but there's
But if-
some would argue the hierarchy. If you don't have a nation, if you're not defensive,
Safety.
safe.
And pause right there. What is something that, okay, what is something that you're noticing is happening in this discussion right now? I didn't leave.
Engaging.
They're engaging, but what's happening to people's voices?
Some are disappearing. Like, I didn't hear Ms. Reed say anything, I haven't heard Mr. Chum say anything.
Okay, so some voices are not, so we're not hearing from some voices.
Telepathically.
But would you say that some voices are not, being given the space to fully develop their ideas?
We're talking over
No.
each other a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking over each other
Just
here.
Mr. Brady.
Okay, so I didn't intend to do this, but I'm glad that I did. If you don't set norms up for the conversation, that is going to happen. So I have 4 simple norms. 1 voice at a time, and a talking piece to help that. Eventually you want to get the kids moving away from that because, I'm sorry, no one's going to sit at an executive table with a talking piece. Unless you do in department meetings.
I mean, the one mic.
Yeah, like
or
a
the
stick or
one
like I use
pocket, the
those
ball.
play balls.
Ball.
The second one is equity of voice. Everyone must contribute. And because that's a norm, you are responsible for calling people in. Part of your grade depends on that, ensuring that everyone is being heard. Third, cite evidence from the text. Tell people where you're reading from. The next is accept non-closure. We're not always looking for an answer and we're not always going to agree. Sometimes kids can go on and on and on about something and the discussion isn't as robust or as interesting as it initially was. At that point, you either need to train your student facilitator to notice that and push students to move on, or you need to step in and say, I love the conversation and I love the engagement that I'm seeing. I want to be sure that everyone has had an opportunity to share their inquiry-based question. Let's move on to the next person, and maybe circle back if we have time. That way, everyone is being included. So, but that was one major slip up on my part. But that's something I learned when I tried this out. There weren't norms that just said go. Yes.
I have a logistical question. I see you have the diagram right there. So in a classroom, you have 3-4 groups. How do you keep track, or there's someone in the group keeping track of that?
So I'm fortunate enough to have a co-teacher. The first time that we launched these in our class, Ms. Barbosa and I were running 2 large groups. So she was acting as the data tracker and I was acting as the data tracker. The groups were fairly large, about 15. So there were some voices that were not heard. But as students became comfortable seeing how this was being tracked and seeing the system, they are now able to do this themselves. Or you'll have students that are excited about it and want to take that leadership role. One thing that we didn't get to, but we kind of touched on already, is this piece. After about 15 minutes into the discussion, I would pause my kids to engage them in reflection, which is somewhere on the TGDC, the Teacher Growth and Development Cycle. It is one of the indicators of a highly effective practice. I would stop them and I'd ask my students, what trends are you noticing? Let them generate their thoughts. What changes do you want to commit to making in the next 15 minutes?
So it looks like mostly we're just extending, we're not really bringing in too much textual evidence. I see one connection, but we're mostly just adding to the comment.
And you affirm that, that's great, we want to move that. Also, there's some voices being left out, let's be sure they're being given a chance to chime in.
That too, Ms. Reed doesn't say anything.
And then you just ask the kids, like, how are you gonna make it? I know that this feels rushed, but Mr. Engel does have other things on the agenda.
You can, as long as I get 15 minutes.
Okay. Do you all wanna kinda continue and see how it trickles out? Yeah? Okay, so let's go through the trends. We're not citing enough text. People are extending on ideas, that's great. We're having some connections. Clarification, that's actually sometimes good, that you don't see too much of that, because that means the students are developing good questions.
What do you do when there's no, like, that was not really a text-based question, nor is mine. So how does minutes.
So for those, like, that's one of the big differences about Harkness and the Socratic method. The Harkness allows students to develop their reasoning skills independent of the text. They're able to bring in
No,
their.
but I mean, you said in order to get the highest grade, which of course we all want, we have to have text, and how do you bring in the text if then with the questions?
So that's where I would allow that to happen, because the kids do, like, again, we want the kids to be able to notice these patterns themselves. During this point, I asked them, what changes do you want to commit to making? That text evidence piece, okay, are we asking questions that are allowing us
Is
to
it
get
just
to
one
that?
person per group, or could I just add in and say, well, the problem is pensions, it's specifically stated at the very top of the third page?
You could do that.
Absolutely, yeah,
Then that would suffice for the whole group?
yep, because you want that, you want to see people doing it. And
And clarification is asking the question?
like, say that you asked a question that was convoluted. I could then, hey, can you restate that, or do you mean this? Is that, sometimes it's good for the kid, how many of you often have kids ask you, wait, can you explain this question to me?
Yeah.
By giving them, an incentive to sort of dig in to these convoluted questions that show up on the SBAC, they're better prepared to do that on test day. Yeah.
So during the discussion, is there any need for like having the board and writing the question on the board so that kids who have limited attention ability, you know, they're immediately thinking about something else, whatever, and that there's the question? Because if you don't really stay, you know, current in the thought, you can very quickly lose a third of the group within about 2 minutes, and then another third in about 5 minutes. If they forget, like, what was the question, and what are we trying to do again? And so, do you use the board, or you?
That's an excellent question. That's an accommodation that I did not make for the purposes of this, but there is a student facilitator in all of my groups now, and they type up the question into Google Slides, and then we'll turn the question towards their group so that people can reference it.
That's excellent.
Okay, you guys ready to jump back in?
Yeah.
All right, let's hop back in. Can we have another question read? Any volunteers or victims?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I found my voice.
Okay.